I'm thinking at the end of this life story, as it is, to think about saying some things about what I've learned in life and some things that I hope to say to my children and grandchildren. One of the things that I have come to realize is that there is that light is extremely important in our lives. That it is possible for us to allow light to come in to our lives, to make conscious decisions about having light and to seek for light. And that the more light that we have in our lives, the more love that we are capable of manifesting. In fact, I'm convinced that there is some metaphysical connection between light and love. The more we love, the more light is in our lives. The more light we have, the more we are capable of loving others. And that is an infinitely expanding possibility for us to be able to grow to more and more light. It's one of the reasons I think St. Paul calls us children of the light, is that there is light in everything there is in the universe. And that light seeks the light where it finds it. And that we find light in other people, and that that light is always more powerful than the darkness. You can take light into darkness, but you can't take darkness into light. And so we all contend with both light and darkness, but the choice to have light and therefore to have more love is, I believe, a conscious choice. One of the questions rises in anybody's life as to the meaning of ultimate things, the whole question of the universe. Is there a God? Is there a designer? And one of the things that one of my conclusions is that the possibility of there being not something, that is, the question isn't whether there's something rather than nothing. There are lots of planets, there are lots of stars, there are many suns or universes. We don't yet have any indication that there exists on any of them conditions to produce life like we know it here. The question to me isn't why there is something rather than nothing, but why is there the something that we know? Why is there the capability of someone like Shakespeare or Bach or Emily Dickinson to produce amazing art or science, to be able to create something like the B minor Mass, or to Michelangelo to create his great art? That the human spirit is capable of such an elevated expression seems to me to defy the idea that this is all quite by happenstance or for a series of biochemical accidents that happened over a period of time. Erwin Laszlo is one of the great scientists of our times, and he has written something about this that I'd like to read. The fine-tuning of the physical universe to the parameters of life continues a series of coincidences, if in fact they could be called coincidences, in which even the slightest departure from the given values would spell the end of life, or more exactly, create conditions under which life could never have evolved in the first place. If the neutron did not outweigh the proton in the nucleus of the atom, the active lifetime of the sun and other stars would be reduced to a few hundred years. If the electric charge of electrons and protons did not balance precisely, all configurations of matter would be unstable, and the universe would consist of nothing more than radiation and a relatively uniform mixture of gases. If the strong force that binds the particles of a nucleus were merely a fraction weaker than it is, deuteron could not exist, and stars such as the sun could not shine. And if that force were slightly stronger than it is, the sun and other active stars would inflate and perhaps explode. The values of the four universal forces, electromagnetism, gravity, and the nuclear strong and weak forces, were precisely such that life could evolve in the cosmos, here on what we know as the earth. The mathematician Paul Davies calculated that for all of that to have happened randomly, by accident, without any divine cause or without any designer, would be equal to 10 to the 10th power times 80. In other words, much longer than the life of the universe as we know it. So my belief in the fact that there is something beyond this life and beyond this earth, something within the cosmos, some light, some power, but especially some intelligence, is very strong. And it's one of the reasons why I think light and love are so important. I also have come to believe in the indomitable nature of the human spirit, that there's something in us that is capable of astonishing accomplishments, endurance, and things beyond even our own imagination. I think that William Faulkner, in his Nobel acceptance speech, talked about what he called the eternal verities: love and pride and sacrifice and mercy, those things that have really made civilization what it is. And Faulkner, in his great novel, The Sound and the Fury, he ends that by saying that he felt that human beings would endure. In his Nobel acceptance speech, he said, "I've changed my thinking on that. Not only will human beings endure, but we will prevail." And I believe that our power to prevail, the choice to prevail, is one of the things that has guided civilization. As we look around us, that as I talked about, the universe and a designer, some intelligence, it's also possible to look around and say, there is so much chaos, there's so much death, there's so much war and evil. How can there be a God? It's one of the questions people ask. And Hugh Nibley, one of my teachers, said that the church fathers, the rabbis, the early church fathers, looked at the world around them and saw things that were just, they couldn't make sense of. And going to what the scriptures, what Abraham says, should the God of justice be unjust? How can you explain God and explain all of these other things? And Dr. Nibley said the church fathers raised their fist to the heaven to challenge God. And he says, and God loved them for it. They were willing to risk offending God because they cared so much about their human beings, their fellow human beings. So that idea of challenging the heavens, I think, is also something that is embedded in us by divine design. Annie Dillard, the great American writer, says, how can we be so presumptuous as to challenge God about the things that we see around us? But what monsters of perfection would we be if we didn't have that impulse? So I think that idea, which is certainly part of my life, is looking at the injustices of the world and responding to them. Martin Luther King said that injustice anywhere can lead, or not to counter injustice anywhere could lead to greater injustice in the world. So part of the reason I think we're here is that when we see things that are unjust, that we make some attempt to address them and to correct them. I believe that one of the purposes of our being here is to find meaning wherever we can in life and to make meaning. And one of the great excitements of my life is that there have been times when I felt that I have been able to find meaning and make meaning that was original, that at least I felt as I was making meaning or discovering meaning someplace that no one before me had seen quite what I had seen in the way that I had seen it. But whether that's true or not, the important thing is that with the intelligence we have, with our emotions, with all that we have that we're capable of, that we keep we look for patterns, we look for symbols, we look for connections, and that part of being an educated and sentient being is to try and make that meaning and to make the connections between all of the things that we learn, even things that seem like they would never be connected. There is a deep connectedness in the universe, and as we live our lives, we try to find that. I also am a person who believes that we should live our lives with both faith and reason. My experience is that people who live just by faith are more likely to have certainty to a dangerous degree. That is, they believe that if they're just going by faith, it's easy for them to not have any challenge to that faith. So reason is also something that we are capable of, and I believe that both faith and reason are necessary for us to find truth. That my mentor and friend Lowell Benyon spoke of this as carrying water on both shoulders. That truth and reason have a dialogue with one another. That we are given hearts and we're given brains, and when our hearts and our brains have a conversation with one another, when they share intelligence about what they sense and understand, our chances are much greater of both arriving at truth and staying away from the dangerous dogmatism that often is very, very crippling in our lives.